Burning questions.
Insightful answers
Listener's choice.
with Clement Manyathela.
So, Listener's Choice is a feature that we started 6 years ago when we started the show, which really looks at the topics that you want us to talk about, which may not necessarily be on our radar. You know, me and the team, we discuss and decide what content we're going to bring for you. But there are also opportunities for you to tell us what you would like us to talk about. So think about it as an opportunity to co-curate the content of the show with us. So one of our listeners has asked that we discuss franchising today and bring in an expert who can better explain the dynamics around franchising. And of course, we know franchising as this business structure where a franchisor allows a franchisee to operate a branch of its brand in exchange for fees and adherence to specific guidelines. And franchisees are an effective way for entrepreneurs to start a business, especially when entering a highly competitive industry, whether it's like fast food or an industry that is established and requires time to develop its operating processes from scratch. So if you've got your own questions around franchising, you want to understand it better, you want to raise a concern about, how some things are structured, give us a call on 011-883-0702. The WhatsApp line is 072-702-1702. Larry Hodes is the CEO of Grow Franchising and a board member for Franchise Association of South Africa, who's going to guide us through this conversation. Larry, thank you for making time. Good morning.
Clement, thanks for having me.
What are the advantages and disadvantages of investing in a franchise business instead of, I suppose, starting an independent business in South Africa?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that, considering when a business normally starts franchising, it means that it's got a proven economic model. In other words, it's a model that works and it incorporates a brand. So a lot of the risks, as so come and say, as an example, one of the most riskiest businesses globally is to go and open up a restaurant or a quick service restaurant, like a takeaway. But that risk is significantly reduced when somebody opens as part of a franchise. Because with the franchise comes, like I said, an economic model, a proven economic model. There's a brand and there's brand standards and all the systems and processes that come with it. So, the great thing is, like with franchising, is that they say is that you're in the business, okay? That you're in the business for yourself, but you've got the support. And that's really, really a big thing. So it significantly reduces risk for people, entrepreneurs, the country, globally, everything.
Mm-hmm. So what is the relationship between a franchisor and a franchisee, and how do both parties benefit from the agreement?
Okay, great. So come and say, a little bit of the journey. So how a franchisor comes about is that there's an individual, we'll come and call him a founder, who goes and creates a successful business. Now remember, franchising extends a lot more than just, because the traditional in South Africa is, it's a lot of retail, it's a lot of QSR, which is food concepts, it's gyms, Planet Fitness in them, and automotive. Those are the main ones. But there's a lot when it comes to education, professional services, senior services. There's so many opportunities that come about within franchising. So, but going back to your question, so a founder goes and creates, so let's just use a fast food. He goes and creates a successful fast food joint, which means that that he's got a proven economic model. Mm-hmm. In other words, there's viability. And another thing with a franchise is that it's possible to transfer the running of the business. So in other words, if the owner stepped out, there's all the systems and processes and everything that is there that enables them to run the business successfully. And they must have, because in South Africa, franchising is very legally regulated. So there's a lot of things that need to be done. So it's a protected ecosystem. And then another thing being is that franchising has to abide, and it's got to be ethical, and its relationship with its franchisees has got to be ethical. So the franchisor opens a business. He says, "Wow, this is great. People are asking me to expand." He goes and says, "Okay, let me put in all the systems and processes. Let me have what's called a franchise disclosure document and a franchise agreement." And there's quite a few things that he puts in place. Then he says, "Okay, cool. I'm based in Joburg. There's somebody from Cape Town who says, you know what, I'm really impressed with your brand. I would like to open the Exact." And that individual in Cape Town becomes the franchisee. And normally how it works is that the franchisor charges the franchisee as part of the brand, so there'll be a joining fee for the franchisee to go and join and become part of the franchise brand. And then there's monthly ongoing fees, which are like royalties and part of marketing. Those are the norms.
Okay. So what lessons do you think we can learn from, because I'm just thinking now, some established franchise brands like McDonald's, or look at the KFC. These have been so successful in the South African market. And I'm just wondering, why are these established franchise brands like McDonald's and KFC so successful in our market? What have you observed as, what's being done right?
So there's, if we go back to a book it's called The E-Myth Revisited, which is Michael E. Gerber, and it was written, I think, in the 80s. And it's quite a successful, it's a very successful business book. And the business is all about how do you get your business to run without you? And if you think about it, that is franchising. And he uses the McDonald's case study throughout. And it really is one of those incredible things that whether you're going to be in Soweto, Cape Town, Pretoria, Japan, Australia, wherever you are in the world, what are their burgers called? McDonald's. Whatever their burgers are called, there's that standard name. It doesn't matter wherever you go in the world, it's going to be exactly the same, because the business is so systemized that everybody knows exactly what to do, when, what happens. The full process is there. And then also, from an established brand like that, they've got a lot of clout when it comes to marketing and getting the brand even more out there.
And how do you get into that? Like, how easy or difficult is it to join a franchise like that? Like to, own like your local McD, McDonald's, or KFC? Is it very difficult?
Okay, so KFC have for many, many years, it's been maybe 20, 30, 40 years, and, somewhere around there, is they actually stopped taking outside franchisees a very long time ago. And what they've done is they've got some franchise owners that own up to 100 stores, sometimes even more.
Jeez.
And then look, it's incredible. Those are franchise businesses on their own, but that's, but there's another power in that. And so with McDonald's, I'm not actually, I think they are still taking, but places like McDonald's and KFC, there's a high entry from a capital point of view. It's very expensive, but you know what? They run proper businesses. They are proper businesses. And yeah, if somebody's got the capital, I think you can still get into McDonald's.
Okay,
which is an opportunity, but KFC, I know it's not.
It's so that's closed. It's more for the people who already exist in that system.
Yeah, and obviously I know they are doing a lot with black entrepreneurs.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you spoke about branding, trademarks, and I'm just wondering how important all of that and even the operational systems are to the success of a franchise business. Or let me ask it in this way: like, can I decide on my own that this is what I want, like the feeling of maybe this shop I have here to be, or do I always have to consult with the franchisor just to make sure that we're aligned? So you can't change a menu or change the colors of the store, or like, what are the things that must remain consistent unless you've discussed it with, of course, the franchisor?
You know what, Clement, I'm gonna answer that as a story. And for many years, so I was part of the opening team that initially worked on Mug and Bean. I was there with them for for quite a few years, and we grew the brand, from the beginning. And often I would sit near. So the guy who started Mug and Bean, and some people would know him, is Ben Malta, an incredible individual, and my office was about 20 meters away. And often I would hear, or no, not often, but every now and again I would hear, franchising is not a democracy. In other words, don't come, and this is the thing. You've got a lot of entrepreneurs who think, okay, cool, I'm going to buy a franchise. But when you buy a franchise, it's like joining a golf club or a club. A club has got certain rules: how you must dress, how you must show up, how you must do this, how you must do that. And and this is one of the most important things with a franchise, is that there's essentially two things from a head office, a franchisor, that they've got to do. The biggest thing, without a doubt, is to protect the brand. Anything that's brand related, whether it's service, whether it's the food, beverage, whatever, it really doesn't matter. Anything to do with brand, they're there to protect. But another thing is they're also there to go and grow the brand.
Yeah.
So the brand is like the Bible of a successful franchise. And going back to McDonald's, they've got many Bibles. They've got so many systems, pros, everything. Stick to the brand. If you as an entrepreneur is not able to do that, as much as franchising, I know it's a brilliant option. I'm going to say, please don't go into it, because you are going to struggle. Because going back to Ben's words, franchising is not a democracy.
Yeah. Larry Hodes is guiding us through a conversation about franchising. And I see some of you have got a few questions for him. So let's start with, and some of you are sharing your own experiences because you are in a franchise. Mamelo, let's start with you. You're calling us from River Club. Good morning.
Morning, Clement, and to your guest. I'll get straight into it. I was actually just calling to try and share some wisdom and maybe a warning to those that want to go into franchising. What happened with us when we bought into ours is they provided all of the studies that were like feasibility studies for the area, demographics, etc. And it was our fault, because I'm not going to blame them for inflating numbers and giving inaccurate data. It was our fault for us not actually going after receiving their documents, then backing it up with our own research.
Independently.
We didn't go out and do it independently to see if it's actually valid, because there was a lot of key things that they had left out that we only started figuring out as the business was running. And I think just another caution I'd like to send out is that the franchise fees and the money that you spend buying into the franchise to get it up and running, and once you open your doors, you need to remember that you need running capital. You need to be comfortable with not making an income until you break even, for example, like 6 to 12 months of sort of backed up savings, just in case things don't work out according to plan as you market your business and it becomes more popular. Some people are lucky because they open the franchise and it booms straight away. Sometimes it's not so lucky and you end up having to kind of market yourself and build your business and build your brand from the ground up, and it's not always a profit from the beginning.
Yeah. What about the royalty payments though? Was that not
Yeah, the
affecting the
royalties were.
profitability of the business in the beginning?
Yeah, it does. It does, and that's another thing that we also just we overlooked it based on what the numbers were given. Based off the numbers they had given, we thought, okay, well, we'll be able to cover that sufficiently. It's enough, and they were charging us 20%,
Sure.
which is quite a lot.
Yeah, that's quite a bit, Mamelo.
Yeah,
Thank you so much
yeah.
for sharing your experience with us.
Thanks, Clement.
Thank you, Mamelo, calling us from River Club. Larry, I've got a question here from someone who's asking about like the KFC model, for instance. He says,
Yes.
the KFC model of closed access, is that not anti-competitive? What does the Competition Commission say about this?
You know what? Great question, Clement, and I don't think I'm adequately qualified to go and answer that question. I don't, you know what? No, I'm not going to put because, you know what, but it's also where franchising is going. Franchise is going into multi-unit operators, you know, which is where a franchisee, a successful franchisee, is able to go and get and obtain more stores. A big thing that is overseas, like in Europe and Australia, it's called multi-unit, multi-brand operators, MUMBO. It's actually a term, which is huge, where with a franchisee has got multi-brands and multi-stores within those brands. You know, and there's a lot of positives, that come through that. But going back to KFC, I'd rather not answer because I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. Another person says, can one franchise a company like Chicken Licken or Spur in other parts of the world where it does not exist, as opposed to your KFCs and McDonald's that are everywhere? What would be the success rate, and what are the red tapes, the advantages or disadvantages of such an approach? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, well, okay, well, absolutely, but with permission. It's got to be by a contract, by agreement. And I'm going to use Nando's as a great case study. They were here, they become successful, then they opened in the UK. You know, right now I'm not sure, but they're in 20-something countries. They've got over 1,000 stores, but they've managed to open. But everything is regulated by one head office. And that's all regulated by the brand, and that's going. So it's not as simple as just saying, I think, Chicken Licken, let me go and open in the States, if it's not there. Because Chicken Licken would have also ensured that their name has been patented, whatever that term is, copyrighted and, everything like that. So yes, they can, but it's got to be by agreement.
Yeah. Here's a quick voice note before we get to the headlines.
Clement, how's it? Just check with your guest. Is it fact or fiction that there's actually a balance sheet line in some of these franchise operators' balance sheets, which make provisions for stores closing down and them then reselling it after some goodwill has been developed? In other words, a business opens from scratch, doesn't do well at close, but has been doing a couple of $100,000 a month turnover. They then resell that store with a turnover at an inflated rate, not necessarily to recover costs, more so as a line item on their balance sheet. Is that fact or fiction?
No, thank you so much, Larry.
So I'm not sure, because there might be. Unfortunately, there are here and there, some unethical franchises. But going back to that, yes, it might be a line item, but it's definitely not a way. Because if the business was successful, or come and say it closed, somebody can only go and buy that brand for the value, that it's actually worth. So that's best my answer, because there might be, but with FASA, and FASA is really big on this when it comes to ethical franchising and ensuring, because we ensure that we're mediators between the franchisor and franchisee. We do whatever it takes to ensure that everything is above board. Another thing, and I know you've got to go, Clement, one thing today that I just want to mention is that today is World Franchise Day.
Oh.
So it's really appropriate,
Yeah.
that we're actually chatting, which is the second Wednesday in every year in June.
That's amazing. I didn't even know that, Larry. Thank you so much for joining us and guiding us through this chat. I think we should do part 2 of this conversation because there's so many other clarity-seeking questions that have come on the WhatsApp line.
Hanging out with Clement
On 702.
Let's walk the talk.